Over the years, we have seen some amazing basketball teams, but there have also been teams that have failed to meet the expectations of their fans. Today, we will be taking a look at the bottom of the barrel and ranking the 7 worst teams in NBA history. From bad coaching decisions to lackluster performances, these teams have all earned their place on our list. So, without further ado, let's get started. Number 7. 1993 to 1994 Dallas Mavericks. This team had a record of 13 wins and 69 losses, which is the 3rd worst record in NBA history. They had a lot of issues, including a lack of talent and a weak defense. They'd struggled to score points and often found themselves on the wrong end of blowout losses. The Mavericks had a revolving door of coaches during this time, which certainly did not help matters. It was a forgettable season for the Mavericks and their fans. The Mavericks had some talented players on their roster, including Jamal, Mashburn, and Jim Jackson, but they just couldn't seem to put it all together. The team was plagued by injuries throughout the season, which further hampered their chances of success. Head coach Gar Heard was fired midway through the season and replaced by Quinn Buckner, who fared no better. The Mavericks finished the season with a winning percentage of just 159, which is the 4th worst in NBA history. It was a season that Mavericks fans would rather forget. Number 6. 2011 to 2012 Charlotte Bobcats. This team had a record of 7 wins and 59 losses, which is the worst winning percentage in NBA history. They were a poorly constructed team that lacked any real star power. The Bobcats struggled on both ends of the court and were outscored by an average of 13.9 points per game. They also had a revolving door of coaches, with Paul Silas being fired midway through the season and replaced by assistant coach Mike Dunlap. The Bobcats had some talented players on their roster, including Kemba Walker and Gerald Henderson, but they just didn't have enough to compete at a high level. They were often overmatched by their opponents and suffered numerous blowout losses throughout the season. The 2011 to 2012 season was a low point for the Charlotte Bobcats, but the franchise would eventually turn things around. The team would go on to make the playoffs in the 2013 season and would rebrand themselves as the Charlotte Hornets in 2014. However, the 2011 to 2012 Bobcats will always be remembered as one of the worst teams in NBA history. What do you think the Bobcats could have done differently to improve their record? Let us know in the comment section. Number 5. 1972 to 1973 Philadelphia 76ers. This team had a record of 9 wins and 73 losses, which is the worst record in NBA history. The 76ers were a poorly constructed team with little depth and no real star power. The team's leading scorer was Fred Carter, who averaged just 20.0 points per game. The 76ers struggled on both ends of the court, ranking last in the NBA in points scored and points allowed. Head coach Roy Rubin was unable to get the most out of his players, and the team suffered through one of the most forgettable seasons in NBA history. Despite their lack of success on the court, the 76ers would eventually turn things around. They would acquire Julius Erving in 1976, and the team would become a perennial contender in the Eastern Conference. However, the 1972 to 1973 season remains a black mark on the franchise's history. Number 4. 1997 to 1998 Denver Nuggets. This team had a record of 11 wins and 71 losses, which is tied for the 3rd worst record in NBA history. The Nuggets were a poorly constructed team with no real direction. They lacked any star power and were often overmatched by their opponents. The team's lack of success on the court also led to attendance issues, with fans staying away from the arena in droves. The Nuggets had some talented players on their roster, including Antonio McDyess and Nick Van Exel, but they just couldn't seem to put it all together. The team was plagued by injuries throughout the season, which further hampered their chances of success. Head coach Bill Hanslick was fired midway through the season and replaced by interim coach Mike D'Antoni, who fared no better. The Nuggets finished the season with a winning percentage of just 134, which is tied for the fourth worst in NBA history. Despite their poor performance in the 1997 to 1998 season, the Nuggets would eventually turn things around. They would make the playoffs in the following season and would go on to have a successful run in the early 2000s. However, the 1997 to 1998 season remains a black mark on the franchise's history. The team struggled on both ends of the court and failed to live up to even the most modest expectations. It was a season that Nuggets fans would rather forget. Number 3. 1952 to 1953 Indianapolis Olympians. This team had a record of 17 wins and 49 losses, which is tied for the 9th worst record in NBA history. The Olympians were a poorly constructed team with no real direction. They lacked any star power and were often overmatched by their opponents. The team's lack of success on the court also led to attendance issues, with fans staying away from the arena in droves. The Olympians had some talented players on their roster, including Alex Groza and Ralph Beard, but they just couldn't seem to put it all together. The team was plagued by internal turmoil throughout the season, with players feuding with each other and head coach Hearn Schaefer. Schaefer was fired midway through the season and replaced by Alex Ham, who fared no better. The Olympians finished the season with a winning percentage of just .258, which is tied for the 3rd worst in NBA history. Despite their poor performance in the 1952 to 1953 season, the Olympians would eventually disband after the following season due to financial issues. Groza and Beard would also be banned from the NBA for their involvement in a point-shaving scandal during their college days. The Olympians' lack of success on the court and off-the-court issues make them one of the worst teams in NBA history. Number 2. 2015 to 2016 Philadelphia 76ers. This team had a record of 10 wins and 72 losses, which is tied for the worst record in NBA history. The 76ers were in the midst of a rebuilding process and had traded away many of their talented players in exchange for draft picks. However, the team was left with a roster that lacked any real NBA talent. The 76ers had some young and promising players on their roster, including Jalil Okafor and Nerlens Noel, but they just weren't ready to compete at a high level. The team was plagued by injuries throughout the season, which further hampered their chances of success. Head coach Brett Brown was given the unenviable task of coaching a team that was designed to lose, and he did his best to develop the young players on the roster. Their poor performance in the 2015 to 2016 season, the 76ers rebuilding, the process eventually paid off. They would acquire Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons through the draft, and the team would become one of the most exciting young teams in the NBA. However, the 2015 to 2016 season remains a black mark on the franchise's history. The team intentionally tanked in order to secure a high draft pick, and they did so in spectacular fashion. It was a season that 76ers fans would rather forget. Number 1. 1995 to 1996 Vancouver Grizzlies. This team had a record of 15 wins and 67 losses, which is tied for the 5th worst record in NBA history. The Grizzlies were an expansion team and were playing their first season in the NBA. However, they were ill-prepared for the rigors of the league and lacked any real NBA talent. The Grizzlies had some promising young players on their roster, including Sharif Abdur-Rahim and Mike Bibby, but they just weren't ready to compete at the NBA level. The team was often overmatched by their opponents and suffered from a lack of depth. Head coach Brian Winters was unable to get the most out of his players, and the team struggled all season. The Grizzlies' struggles on the court were compounded by their struggles off the court. The team had trouble drawing fans to their games, with attendance often well below capacity. The franchise also faced financial issues, with ownership struggling to keep the team afloat. Despite their lack of success in Vancouver, the Grizzlies would eventually move to Memphis and become a successful franchise in their new city. So, there you have it, folks. The top 7 worst teams in NBA history. While these teams may not have had much success on the court, They serve as a reminder that even the worst teams can eventually turn things around, whether it's through smart drafting, savvy trades, or just plain luck. Any team can become a contender in the NBA. These teams may not have had the best records, but they will always be a part of NBA history. Let us know in the comments if you agree with our list or if you think there are other teams that deserve to be on it. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.